Hello, welcome from the Curmudgeon in the Cellar. I'm making this video later than I normally would, so I probably look more haggard than normal. And no, the poker game fell apart. There were just other things. I've been batching it all week, so I've been binging on my Fire Stick and all the stuff that my wife wouldn't enjoy watching with me. And I've got some really interesting things to talk about tonight. So draw up a chair or get something to drink or whatever. I know some of you listen to this on breakfast on Saturday morning. Okay. Hope your eggs are done just right. Let's see. What do we start with? I have some interesting questions to deal with, and they all kind of tie into one of the topics that I listed here about the old school and what it means. All right, we're going to start with a story that comes from a question, and it illustrates one of the things about the old school. The question is, and I'll read it. I always feel that's easier than me paraphrasing. Did you ever introduce or think about industrial magic versus combat magic in D&D? Like in my long ago home game, if the players cast a light spell on an old rock, it lasted, and then on a crystal ball, I'm going to synopsize now, crystal ball, it lasted longer. Combine stuff like that with a permanent spell, and wealthy people don't need lamp oil. Okay, yes, I allowed that kind of stuff to a point. I allowed a lot of magic research in my original campaign, a lot of it. And in my latest campaign that fell apart a couple of years ago at convention season, and the fact that I had a couple of toads sitting on a log in the group who didn't do anything, I allowed diminutions of existing spells. The fireball didn't have to be a fireball if all you wanted to do was light your campfire. And if that's what you wanted to use it for, that was okay with me. Now, back in the old days, in 74 and 75, before I got to TSR, there were rules in the old school books, the original books, about spell researching, how much money it ought to cost and how long it ought to take. And we did a lot of that kind of stuff. I allowed my players to do a lot of that stuff, and I kept the monies, but I often truncated the times that it took them to do it. And so they were able to, with my approval, of course, come to me and say, I want to do a spell that does thus and such. And I wouldn't ask them, well, usually, pardon me, here I go again. It's time to do the curmudgeon and I get the burps. Usually I did not ask them what they planned to do with it. But occasionally the spell was so bizarre, I did ask, I did want to know what the heck this was going to do. Because I encouraged creative uses of the spells that we had at the time. We had far fewer. So I let them cast permanent light spells on crystals on the end of staffs to give them a light source. I had no problem with that. It did away with having to who's carrying the bullseye lanterns, though they often had them in their packs. This way they didn't all need to be carrying a lantern and be encumbered with it. Now, that's an industrial magic on a small scale. I also had occasionally they would find a traveling peddler who had some neat piece of magic that basically cleaned them out of all their money. So they had to go looking again for more. I'm going to tell you a story about a bunch of guys in the real early stages of the game from Ohio that all played together in one of the earliest campaigns. They were early players, the initial players, or I don't know what we'll eventually call them, the seed players. And every time they found an artifact, a magical thing of anything it always had stamped on the bottom the same name, like it was created by. Okay, like if it was jewelry and it said Tiffany's. Okay, and it went on for quite some time. And then these guys got together at a later date and they formed a company. And they decided to name it after this mythical, magical person who produced everything in their campaign. And they called it Ral Partha. And it became Ral Partha Miniatures because everything in their campaign was always stamped Ral Partha. Now, the way I understand it, Ral Winkler, geez, I'm going to blank on his first name. He was introduced to me as Ral way back in the beginning. Best caster I have ever seen. And he was the one who trained me when I was learning how to cast. And he was apparently the DM, and that's what, it was always manufactured by Ral Partha. And so what became the most revolutionary figure company when it came out with an unparalleled, unequaled level of detail and precision in their casting was all named from a campaign of a bunch of guys playing D&D. There's a little story for you. So that's how I dealt with industrial magic. And that's how, back in the old days, I actually have pages with the questions in big 14-point print, so I don't need my glasses. Back in the old days, how we allowed magic to be made. New spells, call it what you will. Research it, find it, fine, okay. And then I would determine once they did, how long it was going to take them to, to prepare it and all that kind of stuff. And it would be introduced into the game. And I was fine with that. I didn't make them tell me what they were going to do because they were going to use it against me. Not against me, against the creation of my dungeon and the tasks I set them. But, if you're a DM, you know what I'm saying. Here's one. Artifacts. Named artifacts. Eldritch Wizardry, we published a boatload of artifacts where, again, we were still trying to feed people of ideas. Hey, these are what we did. Make up a bunch of your own, okay? This was still feeding a growing market that was expanding in understanding of the game, and they were voraciously eating up everything. And so there are some of those things that come out of Greyhawk. The mighty servant of Luco was a big automaton that Luke, when he was like 6 or 8, when they were first playing, Luke wanted to play. And of course, he was just a little bitty kid. So he had this great big automaton that his servant went up and bashed people and stuff. That's real. I was asked about the Sword of Cass. Before I answer that, think of the apparatus of Qualish. One day, as we were getting ready to do Eldritch Wizardry, I came up the steps into my office, and Brian said, "Hey, what was the name of your campaign down in Carbondale, or your main villain or whatever?" And I said, "What was the Qualishar campaign is what I called it. Qualish was the elusive, mysterious figure, that they never found, etc. Always looking for him." And so Brian needed a name for this device he'd cooked up that's kind of like a mechanical crawfish or crayfish, depending upon which part of the country you live in, or crawdad. And so it was named after my my protagonist, if you will. The sword was just named after. So yeah, he used my name. We were desperate for finding names for this kind of stuff. So to us, they were Easter eggs. There's a whole bunch of them, Eldritch Wizardry. stuff that was named after things in our campaigns or things that happened or something out of Greyhawk. And right now, not having a copy handy. Nah, maybe I'll do that in a future one and go and reveal some of the Easter eggs. But we looked up, we named them after friends. It just it was our fun because we were going to throw these artifacts out here, and some of them are named after Gary's characters, and some of them are named after stuff that happened in Greyhawk. So it was, to us, it was inside jokes. That's all it was, just fun. I had no idea they were going to become iconic. I had no idea they were going to name a sword after me that apparently is still in the game. That blows me away. Let's see. And then the other half of this individual's question was about dwarves and sloping passages. And I have another question I'm going to wrap into this. It also asks about dwarves and how we originally did them. Gary felt, and I quite agreed, I never varied from that. Gary felt that after all, dwarves are underground creatures that no matter how subtle the slope, they would certainly eventually automatically detect that they're going down or uphill, whereas a human or an elf or whatever, well, basically everybody was humans way back then, and dwarves or elves, they would not notice a subtle decline of maybe only 6 inches over 30 feet in a long corridor, and not know that now they're down another level. Dwarves have a natural uncanny instinct born into the fact that they are traditionally, in almost all of the mythologies, underground dwellers. So we felt that why not give them an innate skill? They were so limited when Gary first wrote them up. If you recall, they were not allowed to go above 5th level. That was a max out for a dwarf. Gary didn't want dwarves overshadowing humans. Gary was very humanocentric in all of that structure that he did in the original game. Very, very humanocentric. Gary's idea was the heroic, big blood-chested, blonde hair blowing in the breeze hero, brawny hero who saved the world. That was not even if he was a benevolent wizard, as he's been portrayed since Gary Con in that, no, that was not his vision. So going to the other question concerning dwarves, the gentleman speaking about rangers were a favorite class, and he always played one if his stats were good enough to create. If not, he played a dwarf. Well, I understand. I love playing dwarves, and I immediately violated the 5th rule, because the second game I ever played at Gary Con, or not at Gen Con, in 1974, I played a dwarf character who rescued a dying dwarf king, who made this guy the king, which is obviously bigger than 5th level. So I never really cared about those level restrictions, especially in the early campaign, because a lot of what I was doing was playtesting. And if you're wondering why I'm speaking so much louder tonight, it's because my wife's not in the house, sleeping right above me, so I don't have to worry about waking her up. And then it goes on to ask, were Tolkien's works an influence for the class, and do you think it may have been a little overpowered compared to the fighter? Okay. What a lot of people don't realize is, or don't remember or haven't picked up on, and it may not be their fault, I'm not going there. A lot of those special characters required certain high stats to begin with. So they were going to be the exceptional player character in that time period when these were created. Yeah, Rangers were a little. They were some kind of druidy guy that slips through the forest and slits your throat if he wanted to. Except they were good. Actually, Gary disliked having to fight against Tolkien's imagery. He didn't think that dwarves ought to be Tolkien's dwarves, and he certainly didn't think that Tolkien's elves. Gary saw elves more in the Western European, mischievous, sometimes nasty. That was his bring, and they weren't, because it wouldn't have gone down. We made what we hoped would sell, what people would want to play. So we fought against Tolkien influence. That's why I printed early on an article that Gandalf, by stats of the original D&D, nothing Gandalf did made him any higher than a 5th level magic user in D&D. None of the spells he performed would indicate that he's any higher. Go look it up. Go find it somewhere where the PDFs are online or whatever. It makes a very cogent argument. Oh, it set off the mail. And if I put it on Facebook today, people would go bug shit. Oh, of course he must be bigger. Well, not back then. And context is so important to what is now considered the old school. 30-year-olds today would have no idea what this shirt means. Okay, that's the long lamented Gygax magazine that the bitchy widow sued out of existence. They want to know what Gygax, it would be all over again trying to figure out how to pronounce Gary's name. Tolkien's influence was very pervasive. It's what helped us launch D&D. Gary was fighting against something that had helped him start. Couldn't help it. Were Rangers overpowered? Yeah, a little bit. They were, they had these. I nowadays I don't have a problem with Rangers that have innate skills. I wouldn't call them spells, and I'm not calling them capital S skills, but abilities, again with a small a, that they pick up over the course of their campaign. And it's up to them and it's up to the DM to keep track of these things and know that, yes, he can do that. He can identify that's not a bird that lives around here, or, whatever. We fought against the image of the Tolkien dwarf. Wanted him gnarlier and less friendly, and sometimes antagonistic. So Tolkien was a mixed blessing. The prevalence of people who read The Hobbit and then The Lord of the Rings, all those bootleg Ballantine issues that had the solid color covers. They were sold in every head shop in America because it was trippy, whether you smoked dope or not. Yeah, I could see why you enjoy playing a ranger, as long as you're not in a desert campaign. Because I would not say that rangers have all those skills in a desert. Not certainly not the first time into a desert. All right, let's see what else we got going here. Oh, okay. I had some. This is not quite as flippant as it sounds, but sort of. Your comments on the Rules Cyclopedia as a complete rule set. And this person says it's his D&D, meaning his core game. Did I ever use it? As it happens, I was at our local hobby shop game store tonight, Games and More, over on the east side of Cincinnati. Yeah, if you're in Cincinnati, you gotta check it out. And we talked about that and the store owner and I, and he said he had a couple of customers that also used it as their core book. Or, you know, one book I'd take on the desert island, it would be this. Pardon me, I gotta oil the tonsils. Hey, NOS, N-O-S, or whatever you call yourselves, send me a case of this a month and I'll plug you every week. It's good stuff. For an energy drink, it's excellent. Where was I? Oh, the Rules Cyclopedia. The only thing I know about the Rules Cyclopedia is this. I know what the cover looks like because I sold a bunch of them on the auction stage at Gen Cons in recent years. No, I don't. I've not read it. When I decided to start writing again and then got involved with Eldridge and Frank and Chris and Jim, I made a point not to read anybody else's stuff, anything else. I did not want anybody to be able to say that I picked something up from them. Now, I've always espoused the idea that, yes, parallel development is certainly possible. None of us are so brilliant that we're the only one that ever thought of doing something a certain way. I don't believe that. Might be the first one, but somebody else would have thought, you know what I'm saying. Okay. No, I don't use it. I don't know what it is. In that, other than I thumbed through it when I was selling it. This goes into as it headlined there, my definition or what I call the old school. I'm going to try to explain our collective vision. By our, I mean Gary and me and Rob to a smaller extent, and Brian to a smaller extent, and Dave Sutherland and Mike when he joined us, Mike Carr, because we were a startup in an entirely different fashion than what a startup is today, because we didn't have a whole lot of money. we started out very poor, and I've said this before. They paid us $100 a week. Now it was actually more, but the taxes and everything were paid on whatever it was, so that we got $100 a week because we didn't have to pay the taxes but quarterly. So we shared a collective fervor, a collective excitement on what we were doing, each from our own perspective. Right, I'm the company editor. Dave's the company artist. Brian's the company bean counter and keeping us on budget and working the orders and the invoices and getting the bills paid and all that stuff. Gary's coming up with a buttload of ideas. All of us are contributing ideas to everything that we're doing, whether it's a board game we're working on or the next supplement. I'm getting ideas, from everybody. So we were striving to get to a point that we felt we had achieved after the last supplement. We felt we had achieved it where D&D would be every DM's world, pretty much the same as everybody else's, but There was nothing saying it had to be. Keep in mind that in every forward, in every supplement, we stated that these were not ironclad, these were suggested. This is a way to go about it. And we encouraged people to make it their own. Just before I helped midwife first edition AD&D, I felt that we had my game, my concept, my conception of the game had reached that ideal that we had been striving for up to that point. Now, first edition AD&D was done for more than just we got to have tournaments, so we got to make rules. It was also done as part of the lawsuit about who got paid royalties on what. Okay, if that hadn't come up, D&D at first, a remake of the game might have been another year down the road. But business and legal considerations and lawsuits between Dave and Gary about who got what, who's entitled to how much, precipitated this. Gary and Brian thinking that they could rebrand this as Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Dave sued and he got a piece of the action. So the timing was forced by many things. I chose to become a fly trapped in the amber right there in that interim period. Today, when I run games, which I'm very gratified to say you almost always fill up, I'm running such a simple game that's just for fun. I don't have to do any prep. All I got to do is print up pre-gen sheets, and it's my world because I said so. If there's any radical differences, I'll tell people before the game starts, or they'll figure it out right away. There aren't. Except don't expect that just because it's a bugbear that it's going to be exactly like the bugbear from the book, because it might be stronger or it might be weaker, if there's a story behind it particularly. I just chose to go with that loosey-goosey. I've said before in print, yes, I've been known to fudge die rolls, never against a player. Occasionally, it just would have been such a bummer that I mitigated the die roll. I didn't take a 1 and make it a 20, but I might have not made it fatal. Because in a true campaign, we're all writing a story together. And as the editor, the GM, DM, call it whatever the guy, person behind the screen, whoever thought up the idea of what you're doing, it's it's our world, how we want to play it, and it's kind of close, but it's not exact. And I really enjoy people but this is back when I first came back into the industry, sitting down and thinking they knew what was going to happen. I really enjoyed that. So that's why I'm there. And I like playing a loosey-goosey style now where we all just have fun. I'm not running a campaign. Just running these fun games at cons. People seem to really enjoy them. I've had people sign up for multiples of them because it's never absolutely the same. Never even close to the same one game to the other, because it's all generated by the players at the table at that moment. Last thing, I don't remember last week. I may have mismatched a couple of game titles. The card game I was speaking of is called Naval War, but I think at one point I might have called it War at Sea. And in reference to last week's good old games. War at Sea is very good. And Victory in the Pacific, which is a companion, is, I think, an outstanding 2-player game. Outstanding. So those are 2. And this is in reference to this young man, when he was very much younger, learned to play board games with his 8 years older brother. And he at the time loved tabletop war games. And if his buddies weren't around to play with him, he got to play his older brother. And so he talks about playing a War at Sea and Panzer Leader and all those great games, which lit up his love of games. His brother quit, but now he has his brother's kids and their significant others coming over to the house to play games. So the gene was passed on. And in my case, as I've said before, neither of my children are much for games, but my son's 2 children do like to play games. And I'm going to see how my great-grandkids like to play games or not as they get older. So I know my gene got passed along. But it's not just a genetic thing. Anytime you can find newbies that are interested, if they're not obnoxious, and this is an age thing as well, a behavior thing, if they're not obnoxious, teach them the game. You'd be surprised when a 12-year-old kicks your butt because they think up something you hadn't thought up just because they're 12 and you're 30, and they think up something so unorthodox you hadn't thought about it. Sometimes it can be quite fun. And we need to keep teaching youngsters. And in my case, youngsters can be 50 and under. Your case, maybe 20 and under. We need to find new players so that we have somebody to play with. My dream, if I had to go into a home, which I have no intention of doing, but if it came to that because of circumstance, I would hope to have 4 or 5 other war gamers in the home with me so we could sit around and play war games while we slowly lost our minds. So find those people to teach, because they're the future. They're the next game designer. There's great old games out there. There's good new games coming out there. A lot of good new ones. Just remember, just because it's funded on Facebook doesn't mean it's a great game. And I say this with no animosity to anyone in particular. But just remember, it funded. Okay, that means they did one of several things, or one or more of several things. They did a great advertising sales campaign. They did a great video. It was very colorful and attractive. And perhaps it does have a cogent set of rules and is fun to play. Now, I myself have never been burned by a Facebook game. Or a Kickstarter game. I've never been. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. It's a Kickstarter. Like I said, it was much. Oh yeah, it's a lot later than I normally make these. Just because they funded doesn't mean it's going to be good. I've never been burned. I even got one from Kenny. That was what it was promised to be. I did the $100 Monster Ogre, and I'm more than pleased. And that was $100 several years ago when it was worth more than what $100 is today. I did War of Kings by somebody that was totally unknown, but it looked like they had a good idea. The game had lots of neat fiddly bits. And it's a wonderful game. I love it. I take it to cons that I drive to. So on Sundays, if I want to find some people to teach a new game to, I teach them that. But just remember, just because it's funded on Kickstarter, I found out that people are following. What led to this is I found out people are following me on Kickstarter. I had no idea why until I saw somebody else's comment. Just, I guess it's apparently to see what I buy. Must be very disappointing because I haven't bought anything in a long time. because I don't have that kind of loose money anymore. When you're living on Social Security and what you've put together to retire on, $100 games are a little out of the question, but maybe once a year if you're lucky. Not complaining. I think that's about it. I've probably talked long enough. I hope I have, and not too long, of course. And I'll see you again next time. I was trying to fade out the smoke. Didn't work.